Today we're going to talk about one of the most euphoric markets, I would argue at least, in all of history. It may not be the largest bubble. The dot-com bubble was larger, the housing bubble was larger, the bond market bubble is larger, and the jury is still out as to whether or not stocks are in a bubble, but if they are, then that's clearly a much larger bubble than Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. However, in terms of raw emotion, I would say Bitcoin has eclipsed almost every other market bubble throughout history. And that is a function of the internet increasing hype. It is a function of the younger demographics of Bitcoin investors. It is a function of the percentage of retail investors as a total of all the investors in Bitcoin. It is a function of decades of pent-up aggression against governments and national banks that have devalued currencies such that it is essentially a waste to store certain national currencies as they experience hyperinflation. One of the best stories I ever read was, or one of the best anecdotes, what I should say, was in a book called Digital Gold, which details the history of Bitcoin. I don't remember exactly who it was, and I don't remember the exact country. I believe it was Argentina. But basically, he said that his mother came home from getting a paycheck, and they had to rush to the grocery store to basically purchase as many things as they could and run through the aisles before the goods actually got priced upward, because there was actually somebody that walked through those aisles increasing the prices. And that is insane in my opinion. I can't even imagine living in a scenario that's like that, right? That's the effect of hyperinflation, right? If you look at Venezuela, they no longer look at the actual currency itself. They have to actually weigh it to determine the value. So hyperinflation, really pent up feelings associated with that. There's also a number of other factors that are leading to increased emotion in this particular market. There's also the fact that investors in traditional markets are chasing performance at the moment due to the result of negative interest rates or zero interest rates, very low interest rates, and the fact that traditional assets are we're in a weird environment at the moment where we've never seen interest rates deflated this long. So there's all of these perfect market conditions and all of these perfect conditions in general that have led, in my opinion, again, to one of the most euphoric markets in all of history. However, I will still say that this is a complete bubble, and despite all of the arguments that you can say in the favor of Bitcoin, it is not worth $17,000 per. Now, let me be clear about this. This does not mean that you can't make a ton of money off of Bitcoin. I would not be surprised if Bitcoin reaches $30,000 in the next month. Wouldn't even surprise me. Not even in the slightest. It's not worth $17,000 today. It's not even worth $10,000. We're going to talk about why I feel that way in this video. Now, in my opinion, there's four main ways in which you can justify the price of Bitcoin. The first way is its use as a transaction medium. The second way is its use for remittances. The third way is through its use for microtransactions. And the fourth way is the digital gold argument, the way to hedge against hyperinflation and sort of hedge against geopolitical instability and government control. Those are the four main arguments for the value of Bitcoin. The transaction medium argument has become worse as Bitcoin's price has accelerated. And I've actually talked about this in a previous video where the network is operating at capacity, which has resulted in the transactions flatlining. And despite the fact that we actually passed SegWit, we still don't really see that much adoption of SegWit, which means that the scalability of Bitcoin has not improved all that much. But more importantly, a lot of people mention that the network is operating at capacity, and that clearly means that the demand for Bitcoin transactions has increased. However, if that were true, the mempool size, the base level of the mempool size, not the spiked levels, would actually increase over time. But there are still moments where we see the mempool size for Bitcoin actually go down to zero, which tells me that essentially the main reason why we see mempool spikes is either the result of Bitcoin spiking in price, which means that more people are sending Bitcoin between exchanges, or it's the result of attacks on the Bitcoin network. In other words, people that are spamming the mempool in order to slow down the network, which I would not put it past Roger Ver to do. So I would argue that the network as a whole is actually seeing the transaction medium argument decrease in value, at least in present utility. Of course, the future utility might be increasing as a result of the Lightning Network. However, I watched that demo, and while it is awesome that we are seeing the speed increase as well as the transaction fees decrease, I still believe that the UI problem makes it so that Bitcoin is still a long, long way from real adoption as a transaction medium. It's not idiot proof. And until it's idiot proof, nobody's going to want to mess around with sending money if they don't fully understand what the hell it is that they're doing. And it might be very simple for many of us that are involved in the field, but I'm telling you, we have to make it idiot proof for more people to start using it. Plain and simple. Okay? And we've actually seen Steam recently stop accepting Bitcoin as a result of the volatility, as a result of the delays in the transaction confirmations, and so on and so forth, right? And as well as, of course, the transaction fees increasing. So I would argue that the value as a transaction medium has actually decreased when we look at the present value. And I don't think people are discounting the future value at all, like you should if you were actually modeling it out, which, again, you really don't want to, because the inputs for the model would change far too much in a short span of time. However, if you just mentally think about it, the future for Bitcoin really hasn't changed in the last month. There really hasn't been anything that's done in the last month that suddenly has changed my perception of Bitcoin. The Lightning Network is still on course, very cool, and all of the other means in which we can improve Bitcoin as a transaction medium are on the way. And nothing has changed, except another month has passed by, so maybe you realize the present value of that month. Otherwise, nothing really has changed. Okay? And I would argue that the present utility value, in order to support the transactions that currently exist on the Bitcoin network, the total market cap of Bitcoin would only need to be roughly $5 to $10 billion. And the $10 billion estimate is very, very optimistic. Okay, you could support all of the transactions on the network for the purposes of commerce, goods and services, that is, not exchanging between different exchanges so that you can buy altcoins or whatever else. I guarantee you could support the entire network with about a market cap of about $10 billion. And that's including the fact that the entire market cap is not going to be floating. In other words, you could support it with literally 40% of that $10 billion. Okay, you could probably support it with 40% of $5 billion. In total here, the entire network value that's required to support it as a transaction medium is very, very small relative to the total size of Bitcoin. Okay, if you look at this here, you can see that Bitcoin is currently at $290 billion worth of market valuation. So that works out to be, I don't know, maybe like $500 worth of value would be the maximum, I would say, for the present utility value. That's pretty sad from its use as a transaction medium. All right. So very little value coming from that, from a fundamental basis. All of it might be coming from the future value. There's no way to prove that, but I can tell you that the future value still doesn't look that great to me, while the UI is not in place so that it's idiot proof. So that's the first thing. The second way in which you could justify this price is through Bitcoin's use as remittances, or the ability to send money. However, I think the majority of people that could send substantial amounts of money, they're not going to use Bitcoin. You know, you think about Bitcoin as a way to send money, and it just really, it might be convenient in a lot of ways. It's also not convenient in a lot of ways as well. Again, all harping back to that UI, which I will be talking about in a future article/video. In fact, this entire basically outline for this video is coming from the ideas for a future article, which I will flesh out a little bit more. But anyway, the point is, the value coming from remittances, I don't know exactly how much is coming from that argument. However, I will tell you that I think the majority of people that actually want to send substantial amounts of money, unless they're doing it for shady purposes, are probably going to stick with traditional systems, because there's ways to assure you don't screw it up, like Bitcoin. You know, you send it to the wrong address, you're done for. You know, these sorts of things are the types of arguments I really just want to be very clear about. When it comes to remittances, value comes from that, certainly. Is it anywhere close to the value that's being assigned to Bitcoin at the moment? I would argue absolutely not. So that brings us to the third argument, and it's not even an argument. It's just really, you can't get any present utility value from this. It's all future utility value, and that is Bitcoin's use as or for microtransactions. Clearly, you can't use Bitcoin at the moment for microtransactions. The fees are too high, and the speed of the network is far too slow. However, we know that the Lightning Network might fix that, or it might at least alleviate that a little bit, and then maybe once we build layer 3, that might make it get us to the point where we can actually use Bitcoin for microtransactions again, like in the past. Again, I'm not totally sure, but all of that value would come from the future. And if that's the case, then I would argue again that not a ton of value really can come from that use case, which means that the majority of what you could argue for justifying price all comes from the digital gold argument. And unfortunately, I don't think that argument holds a lot of weight. On the flip side, I can't actually prove that that's true. But what I can try to say is that from a qualitative point of view, it really doesn't make all that much sense to me that Bitcoin... It does make sense to me in some ways that Bitcoin is used as a digital gold argument, especially for people that live in Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe, so on and so forth. Certainly it makes sense in some of those countries. But do you really think that much value comes from there? Those places don't have a ton of money in the first place. The majority of the volume is coming from the US and Japan, and that's certainly not a case in those two countries. If anything, at the moment, inflation is very, very low. Okay, we're not dealing with hyperinflation. In fact, we're dealing with the opposite in Japan, deflation. And in the US, we are dealing with lower than anticipated inflation for quite some time, although it's finally starting to pick up the pace a little bit. So when it comes to using Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, that argument goes out the window. What about against geopolitical instability? Well, that's certainly a possibility, but the reason that the price of gold is going down has absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin in the first place. It has to do with the economy doing well. It has to do with US tax cuts as people become more optimistic about the economy. If you look at gold versus Bitcoin, you don't really see gold tanking as Bitcoin goes up, with the exception of the past 2 weeks, which again comes from optimism over the economy and tax cuts rather than Bitcoin. So I really want to draw this back to where is all of this value coming from? And the simple answer is people are getting greedy. People are investing because they want to make money quickly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Okay. So if you're buying Bitcoin at the moment, I don't want you to fool yourself into thinking that you're investing, because you're not. Okay. Everyone's gambling at the moment because Bitcoin's price just keeps going up. And so buying Bitcoin, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's almost a circle. It's not a catch-22, but it is circular logic. Okay, Bitcoin is going up because Bitcoin's price is going up. It's as simple as that. It's the very definition of momentum. In fact, if you look at Bitcoin, we already talked about the fundamentals of Bitcoin. If you look at Bitcoin from a technical standpoint, you're going to see that it's overbought on any technical indicator. If you're looking at the moving average convergence divergence, if you're looking at the relative strength index, if you're looking at Bollinger Bands, if you're looking at almost, I would argue, anything over any time period that's not like the 1 minute, okay? If you look at the longer time periods, you're going to see Bitcoin's overbought on every single technical indicator. And this is part of why I don't bother using technical analysis. I use support and resistance lines because there is certainly psychological things that are associated with those. I also use $1,000 price levels, psychological price areas. This is all behavioral finance. And you could argue maybe Elliott wave analysis or Fibonacci levels could argue maybe that those things could justify some of this, and the fractal market theory and all of that other information that's out there talking about how you analyze markets and price action. But I guarantee you that's not what's driving this market. It's all behavioral finance, and it's coming from people that are greedy, that want to make money quickly. It's an excellent opportunity. At the moment, it's all greater fool investing. You're all trying to invest or buy in the hopes of being able to sell it to somebody else that buys it at an even higher price. Plain and simple, Bitcoin is not worth $17,000 per at this current point in time. However, I wouldn't say sell all your Bitcoin. I think that this is a great time to take advantage of momentum. You can certainly, what I would, if you're going to try to take advantage of this thing, dollar cost average it and keep a tight stop, or do a mental stop. Do something where you keep a close eye on Bitcoin such that you can't actually lose money. As sad as it makes me to say this, it's almost like a Ponzi scheme. As soon as you get to the point where you're playing with just profits, you've won, right? You've straight out won. There's no way for you to lose money at that point. And that's exactly how a lot of people see Bitcoin at the moment, and it makes perfect sense. People will continue investing in Bitcoin. I will not be surprised to see $30,000 in the next month. If you're trying to invest in Bitcoin, in other words, hold it for like 1, 5, 10 years, I would hold off. I don't think it's worth it at this point, okay? It could keep going up for all I know. At this point, it's so disconnected to its fundamentals, it's not even crazy. I don't think there's a such thing as investing in Bitcoin anymore. It's all just speculation. And maybe the odds are in your favor that it goes up. But again, the fundamentals are so disconnected with the actual price at this point that it's anybody's guess as to what Bitcoin's going to do next. Bitcoin could be $30,000 next month. It could just as easily be $3,000. Be prepared for that. I'm serious. Don't think that it can't go down to $3,000 in a month. It very easily could. That's all I'm going to say at this point. I know this was a controversial video. I don't care at this point. If there was ever something I was waiting for to validate my opinion that Bitcoin is a bubble, this did it. This absolutely validated it. And some people will say this is perfect evidence it's not a bubble. Then you probably should think twice, I would say. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you would like to support me, there are some referral links in the description. If you want to buy Bitcoin, there's a Coinbase referral link. If you're interested in some other Bitcoin goodies, I have some Amazon affiliate links in the description. Otherwise, leave a like, comment, and subscription, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Be careful.